Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Witch Watch Season 1, Episode 20. A great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. This episode gives you a lot to think about that you've never really given too much thought before. First and foremost, the squad has to protect Nico from humans. They're just regular criminals, and that's something you never really thought about before, because it isn't just warlocks they have to be worried about. There are regular humans that are going to come after Nico once word is spread. I'm sure there probably have been regular humans that have, because there are witch hunters in this universe, so there have been regular humans who've, hunted down witches. But it's interesting to think about, because it's especially this late in the season to think about it, but like Nico's interactions with people, regular people, but typically it's people at her own school, other classmates who or schoolmates who she uses her magic to help them, and it's usually like no one's tried to take advantage of her. Everyone's just earnestly asked her for help, and she's given it. And it's always kind of, there might be some wacky shenanigans involved, but it has a very positive ending. So for there to be humans who are just randomly trying to hunt her down to try and use her power for their own benefit without asking, it's just an interesting thing that had never really crossed my mind before. And I was like, I'm curious to see if we see that implemented more. Since, once again, it plays into the larger theme of this episode, but it's a small part of it. It's just the inciting incident, but I'm so curious to see if it becomes this bigger thing as the series has progressed, as the series continued, in the form of the manga and stuff. But either way, the main crux of this episode revolves around Keigo's insecurity. Amongst the crew, he is the one that is the most insecure about himself. He's the one with the least amount of self-confidence. And it gave me a perspective on Keigo I'd never really given much thought about, and that is, once again, him and Wolf are two separate people. So unlike traditional werewolves, which, there could be some debate there, when you transform, you're still somewhat yourself. You're probably giving more into your animalistic instincts and stuff like that. So, sometimes they lean into the whole, man versus the beast, type of thing. But sometimes it's like, no, you're still you underneath all that. Versus Keigo's situation, because when he turns into wolf, it's not just like, oh, I'm transforming into a wolf. I'm literally turning into a completely different person. So yeah, like any benefits of I have the power to transform into a wolf, but it's like, yeah, but Wolf is the one that does stuff. I don't. He's like feeling insecure because he's like, I'm a normal human most of the time until I turn into wolf. He's the one with all the strength and all that. I'm just a normal human, and he's feeling insecure about it. It's like when Nico's in trouble, even though he's one of her familiars now, it's like I can't jump into action like Morihito, Khan, or Miharu, who all can do stuff. I mean, Miharu doesn't even have to use his I guess you could be like his vampiric abilities come in with because he's faster and stronger, and even Khan can use his Tengu abilities to add to his fighting. So I'm a normal human, which immediately when I was thinking about that, I was like, well, and it ultimately comes up in the episode, but I was like, well, to be fair, Keigo was a figure skater. So it's like, I'm sure he could probably apply some of that to some abilities, because he has an athlete because we've only seen him really utilize it once, his history as an athlete. And that was when I think it was, during the whole warlock situation, and they were chasing after someone who was connected to that candy you take, and people were getting super strong and high and stuff off of it. He skated across some slime. Only time we've really seen him utilize that since, learning that aspect about himself. But either way, Nico, sees how downtrodden, he feels, and how much he's kind of beating himself up about, not feeling as useful in that situation. And so later on, this ties into Nemu's story, who shows up. She was I love that this initial opening of her, hey, and everyone's excited for her to be there, but she didn't come in her human form. She came in her cat form, and it's no, she's I got all in my own head, and I nervously transformed. I was like, why didn't it? It's because she's here for her monthly check-in to get, turn Keigo into wolf, and so and I love how this continues the whole because she was obviously crushing a little bit on Morihito, but that's kind of died down now, because I think last episode was it added to it, but it was already an established thing. Apparently, Nico explained I'm because Nim was oh, you're actually in love with Morihito? And it's like, yeah, I am. But, she gets super embarrassed. And it's like, oh, Nemu, you're not really good when it comes to the romance stuff, are you? And she's like, well, obviously, doesn't really say anything but blushes and, showcasing that she's not. And so it's kind of what I was curious about last episode, especially after last episode, her pushing forward to try and push Nico and Morihito closer together. That I was like, oh, I'm wondering how that's going to affect how she feels of Morihito. Like I figured at the time, I was like, she's most likely going to spend more time supporting that. And so for her, it's like, I don't even want Morihito petting me anymore because it felt so nice. But it's like, I feel like I'm disrespecting my new friend, my good friend, if I try, have something almost weirdly intimate with her, the man she's in love with. So she hisses at him and goes away and ends up getting close to Keigo, but then she feels weird because it's like, well, Morihito's pets feel nice. Wolf, it's like, well, I also feel a certain way because he helped save me. But then there's also she feels nothing but nervousness from Keigo. I think it's because of the energy he's giving off. And then she jumps to Nico. Eventually, the conversation comes up about Nemu, how she's practicing and training, and they're like, oh, what's she so nervous about? Doesn't she come from a prestigious family? And then you have Keigo bring up something really interesting where he's like, basically, family name and individual talent aren't mutually exclusive. Those are two separate things. So kind of coming into the fray of she, much like he's insecure, she is too, because she feels like she's not living up to her name. There's a lot of expectations that come with that. And I thought that was really interesting that he would have that perspective, understandably. And so this leads to Nico wanting to help him out here. I mean, I love that others jump on him. They're like, look at you trying to be all cool, trying to be act like you're so understanding, like you two are the same. It's like, I think even Morihito was like, oh, you can turn into a wolf. But like I brought up earlier, he's like, yeah, but Wolf's a completely different person. And so Nico has been learning how to put magic into items, enchanting items, and so she gives Keigo a ring that has it's a flying spell, but it's more like a floating spell. But the problem is the higher you get with it, the more unstable the spell gets, but also the quicker the magic runs out. So the lower you are to the ground, the less you're expending the magic for the spell. So that was kind of really interesting, but it's also tied to your emotional state. And so it's about trying to figure that all out. And Morihito's nearby, I think, smiling. And I think it's once again, Nico helping someone else again. And it's just because I think he could start seeing the insecurities Keigo was feeling, the inadequacy. So it's this is going to help him in the long run. So off on his own, in a park or whatever, he's training, and Nemu came over to see what was up. And she was like, I was just, because it turns out she's actually really good at the spell. Most witches are, but it's not a reliable enough spell for witches. That's why they rely on their wands and turning them into their flying objects, because it's a lot more stable. So most witches don't really utilize the spell anymore. So it is kind of a throwaway spell that most witches learn at a young age. But once again, it's not optimal for them to utilize it. So, but she's actually pretty good at it because she's got a talent for magic in general. And Keigo's like, wow, you really are talented and really good. And she's kind of feeling like, no, I'm not that great and stuff at it. But then it's like, oh yeah, actually there's a specific magic you are good at. What is it? You didn't tell me before. Is it a secret? And she's like, well, her initial reason for not telling anyone is because her main reason was well, she didn't want Morihito to know, but at the same time, she's like, well, I'm not going to let Morihito pet me anymore, so it's not going to be as weird if that comes out. I can also tell Keigo. I mean, Wolf already knows, so the only reason why Keigo doesn't know is because Wolf's memories don't tie over to him, but it worked inverse of that. His go over to Wolf's, but just when she's about to be honest with him and open up to him, she thinks about her mom. And now this is where we kind of get into this complicated thing of we can tell she has a complicated relationship with her mom, because it's the conversation about expectations, what people expect from you. And so from her mom, it's they come from such a prestigious family, and her mom's got the perspective of don't open up to people, because she sees Nemu as very a very emotional person. And it's I get it. There's an element of you don't want people to have your weaknesses and your vulnerabilities to be able to use it against you. So don't tell people anything. Keep people at a distance. Don't even tell your friends. And so it's kind of left and her leading a very isolated life, because she she had to definitely hide away a part of herself always, both emotionally and just the whole witch aspect of herself. So she's never been able to be open with people. That's why I think she's now able, like, that's the beauty of this entire crew, is like they can be openly open with each other about everything. And also there's so many people at their school, like, because we haven't spent any time at Nemu's school, so it's a very different thing. So she's not as open about her situation as like Nico is, and everyone knows about, you know, Keigo being a wolf. Well, you know, his close friends know about him being a wolf. You have Kan and Morihito and Nico all out, you know, at their school and everything. So, but like I said, we don't know about Nemu's situation, so it's probably even more isolating for her in that regard. But at least she has the comfort and buffer of this group to hang around. But even then, like, there's probably very few other witches and other familiars she's ever interacted with. Well, witches or other witches or familiars in general that she's interacted with, where she could be a little bit open and more honest about who she is. And what I was going to talk about is, I think it turns into that conversation of parents doing what they believe is right by their child because they're trying to like do right by them by giving them what they want to give to their child and not necessarily believe what they're. It's a want versus need thing where it's like you have your expectations of what you want for your child, because I think we see that moment where she's like, right, like, bury your emotions and train yourself to kind of bury your emotions. And she's like, okay. And she's like, oh, you're such a good girl. That's like, it seems a little manipulative, but that's where the disconnect, where I'm like, I don't know if she realizes how much of a burden she's putting on her daughter, like the pressure she's putting on her, because it might also be like, well, that was put on her. And so she just, you know, it's continued like, you know, it might be like their families kind of continue that over and over. So she's doing what the previous generation did to the previous generation, to the previous generation, on and so forth. So it might be a thing of also like she's coming from the perspective, I'm a parent, I'm trying to equip my child to be the best of the best, to do what's going to protect her in the long run. I'm gonna give you all the tools necessary to survive, and I might not always give you what you might believe you need versus what I believe you need and want, you know. So I think it's a very complicated thing in that regard. And once again, we only get this little snippet of her mom, and we've only heard about her mom in a little bit here and there conversationally, so we don't really know what's in her mom's mind. I'm not going to completely write her off and be like, oh, your mom's a dick. She can seem like that and seem a little rough around the edges, but like I said, we don't know her true intentions of, she might not realize what kind of pressure she's put on her daughter. Or maybe she will eventually learn, and, you know, who knows? So it might not be as bad as I'm kind of like my initial knee-jerk thinking is. It might be like the more nuanced thing of, I'm doing what I believe is right by you, but I don't realize the pressure and heaviness of like, I think I'm doing right, but I'm not realizing like, oh, like this is kind of hurting you and stunting you in other ways. So, and because of the whole like keeping stuff a secret, like it builds up inside of her, and she just feels bad about keeping that stuff from him, and it just unstables her heart, and so she ends up flying off, and the spell is running wild. And it's like, yo, like the more she's freaking out, the higher she's going, and that means like she's floating towards the city, and it's like if she lands at that speed, she can hurt herself. So Keigo applies, like he tries to use the float spell, and he tries to do it, but it's not working to the extent he wants. So it's like, all right, I gotta take what I have as an athlete. So he brings himself closer to the ground to have more stable control over the spell, and utilizes his skills as a figure skater, and he glides, and it's beautifully done, because it's he's the equivalency of how far off the ground he would be, or, you know, ski blades. And so like he's just skiing and gliding, zipping across people and traffic. Even that beautiful moment, he hops over the truck and does a split. Granted, he's draining a lot of the magic in that moment, but he ends up like landing back on the ground, stabilizing it, and making his way to Nemo. And it's like he convinces her like, you have to like fly higher so you can burn out the rest of the magic. She falls and lands in his arms, and it's this beautiful romantic moment where she's just like, doki 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 doki, right? And it turns into like this cinematic, like, what was it, some Nick, like it turns into like a theater movie presentation, and it turns into this like, it almost feels like a shot out of like a musical number in like an anime movie, specifically how it was shot. And like I said, like how it has like the aspect ratio changes and everything, and it's just very beautiful. Her floating on a dandelion and everything. It's like very cinematically beautiful. And then it ends with like, like, oh, like it's a it's a representation of like her necklace, her moon crescent necklace flying out from underneath her shirt, and Kago turns into Wolf, and she's like, yo, turn back into Kago. I have to properly thank him, because she kind of liked Wolf a little bit, but I think it's going to be Kago that's going to be the one she likes. I might have even made this parallel before. It definitely feels like a Sukun and Mocha thing. Once again, if you've never watched or read Rosario plus Vampire, which I have been referencing quite a bit here and there, but the whole aspect of what Kago's circumstances are is what Mocha's is. There's two sides of her. They completely share memories and stuff like that, but it's instead of like in his case it's a moon that transforms, in her case it's a Rosario that seals her away and then unleashes her. That's the difference. Once again, I think I even referenced this previously about, well, Wolf has white hair, outer Mocha, which is like her more battle orientated version of herself, kind of her true form, basically has silverish white hair just like Wolf. So I think I've made that direct parallel before, but yeah. But like I said, it's like Sukun has this relationship with two different women occupying essentially the same body. So I feel like Nemu's kind of in that boat, but it's more Kago than anything, because she's definitely gotten closer to Kago than she has Wolf necessarily. And this episode just exemplifies that. And for her, it's like, well, I'm going to, because he's like, oh, you're going to try and tell him the truth about your situation. And Wolf's like, nah, go ahead and do it. I'm not going to judge you. He's like, I'm all about people just making their own choices and having their own freedom. And I think having been kind of constricted her upbringing, I think that's why the two of them, like both Wolf and Kago, like strike up a chord in Nemo to some extent. And she's like, well, that's you telling me what to do. But she's like, I will tell him. You'll see. And then she doesn't. She just shows up at the house, Morihito's house, and hops into Kago's lap and lets him pet her. And she's like, I'll tell him eventually, But for now, she's just going to enjoy those pets. And it also gives her an excuse to stay close to him. So I thought that was sweet. So yeah, I thought that just kind of a nice advancement in their relationship and their dynamic. And I'm excited to see where that goes going forward. I also appreciate the very extensive outro. I'm assuming that's like the full ending song. But I also like how especially the extended version is tailored around Kago and Nemu. So just thought that was just beautifully done and nice. And like I said, I'm excited to see where that goes, but also just to see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.